The first time Amos Grady saw the child, she was standing in the back of his wagon with a kitchen knife in both hands and a look on her face that said she had already lost too much to surrender 1 inch more. He had only gone into the mercantile at Larkspur Crossing for lamp oil, salt pork, and a length of mule trace. He came back out into the white-hot afternoon to find a narrow little girl in a patched brown dress planted among his feed sacks, one boot braced against a crate. Copper-brown hair hacked off at the jaw, as though somebody had cut it in anger and not bothered to make it even. "Get down," Amos said. She lifted the knife higher. "Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. There is something about a hard story landing softer when you know who's gathered close to hear it." The screen door slapped shut behind him. Old Mr. Bellamy, who ran the mercantile with the grave expression of a church crow, stopped on the boardwalk with a sack of beans in his arms. Two women by the hitch rail turned to stare. A dog sleeping in the shade opened one eye and decided the matter did not concern him. The girl did not blink. "No, sir." Her voice was dry as old paper. Amos stood there with the sun burning the back of his neck and felt every eye on the street settle over him. Folks in 3 counties called him the rancher who hated children. They said it because he never hired boys, because he did not smile when youngsters tore through town raising dust, because he had once told a woman at church that if children were meant to live underfoot, the Lord would have made them shorter than snakes and easier to step over. People liked that line. It let them laugh at a man who made them uneasy. The truth was less tidy. "That ain't your wagon, Poppy," Bellamy said softly, as if addressing a skittish mare. The child's chin lifted. "Ain't his child either." A little murmur moved through the women by the rail. Before Amos could answer, another voice cut in, smooth and sharp with annoyance. "There you are." Mrs. Renley came around the corner of the mercantile in black bombazine and a hat pinned too tightly over hair the color of wet ashes. She ran the county home 2 miles east of town. Everyone knew her by sight. She kept orphaned and unwanted children in a square white building with no trees near it, and the children she brought into town always looked clean, quiet, and starved for some kindness nobody had remembered to list as necessary. The girl's knuckles whitened on the knife handle. Mrs. Renley smiled the sort of smile that never reached a soul. "I'm sorry for the disturbance, Mr. Grady. Poppy, you come down this instant." Poppy did not move. Amos looked from the child to the woman and back again. Just above the girl's cuff, half hidden at the wrist, was a fresh purple mark in the shape of a thumb. Something old and ugly tightened under his ribs. "She with you?" he asked. "Unfortunately, yes." Mrs. Renley reached toward the wagon. "And she'll be with me again in a moment." The knife dipped an inch, not toward the matron, but toward Amos, as if he were the last gate standing between her and a long bad road. "Please," she said. Just that one word. No tears. No bargaining. Only a child who had spent whatever pride she had left and knew there would be none coming after. Amos had heard children beg before. Heard them cry, lie, promise, flatter, and howl. This was none of that. This was a small, desperate truth. Mrs. Renley gave a brittle laugh. "She is dramatic, I'll grant her that." One of the women at the rail looked away. Amos kept his eyes on the child. "How old are you?" 9. 10, Mrs. Renley corrected. "Near enough." Poppy said nothing, but Amos saw the pulse beating hard in her throat. 15 years before, he had buried a 6-year-old boy on the low cedar rise above Bitter Creek. Ever since, the sound of a child breathing too fast had a way of turning his bones to wire. He held out his hand. "Knife." Poppy looked at the blade, then at Mrs. Renley, then back at him. Slowly, like stepping onto ice and hoping it would hold, she placed the knife in his palm. The moment it left her fingers, Mrs. Renley stepped forward. Amos moved once, just enough, and set himself between them. "She belongs to the county," the woman said. "Then the county can come speak to me. You cannot simply take a child." "Looks to me like she took me." Bellamy's mustache twitched. It might have been the ghost of a smile. Mrs. Renley's face hardened. "Everyone in this town knows you want nothing to do with children." That landed because it was meant to. Amos felt all those watching faces wait for him to prove her right. He looked back at Poppy. Dust streaked her hem. One sleeve was missing a button. She had the watchful, cornered look of something that had been taught the world struck first. He could say no. He could hand her back and drive home to his cattle and his silence and the narrow life he had kept that way on purpose. No one would call him cruel. They would call him sensible. He heard himself ask, "You ever ride far?" Poppy blinked. "Some." "You fall off easy?" "No, sir." He nodded once. "Good." By the time Sheriff Tom Hale reached them, half the town had found a reason to linger within earshot. Hale took one look at the wagon, the child, the matron, and Amos's face and said, "What sort of fool business is this?" Amos answered without looking away from Mrs. Renley. "You fixing to tell me why a county child has bruises on her wrists?" The whole street went still enough to hear harness leather creak. Mrs. Renley laughed again, but there was no ease in it. "She catches herself on doors." "Both wrists?" Hale asked. Poppy's mouth tightened. Hale stepped to the wagon and lowered his voice. "Did somebody do that to you?" Poppy looked at Amos first. Not for permission. To see whether he would hold. It went through him like an old nail driven deeper. She said, barely above a whisper, "Yes." Everything changed in the space after that word. Sheriff Hale did not question her in the street. He took Mrs. Renley to the courthouse, sent for Lydia Marr from the clerk's office, and told Amos to drive his wagon round back. Poppy rode there silent as fence wire, knees tucked close, watching every doorway they passed as if trouble might come boiling out of any one of them. Lydia Marr was a widow not yet 30, with ink on her fingers and the sort of stillness some people mistake for softness right up until it refuses to move. She listened to Poppy, saw the bruises for herself, and said flatly, "This child is not returning to that home tonight." Mrs. Renley rose half out of her chair. "On whose authority?" "Mine until the judge returns, if the sheriff will enforce it." "I will," Hale said. What followed had the ragged shape of frontier law doing its best before wickedness got organized. The judge was away. The sheriff had no family fit to place a child with. Lydia pulled out forms for a 3-day emergency guardianship and asked Amos whether he would take the girl until the judge could hear the case. He answered too fast. "No." Poppy's eyes dropped to the floor. It felt, to Amos, like something mean done by his own hand. Lydia said, "Then she sleeps on a cot in the sheriff's back room or gets packed in with 6 other children at the Kellers." Amos hated being cornered, and nothing on earth cornered a man faster than his own conscience. He looked at the iron cot in the rear cell, at Mrs. Renley's tight mouth, and then at the child who had climbed into his wagon because leaving had seemed the only live choice left in the world. "How long?" he asked. 72 hours. He exhaled. "I can manage 3 days." Poppy's head came up so quickly it hurt to see. Lydia set out the papers. A gust through the transom lifted one corner. Mrs. Renley began objecting again. Hale cut her off. Lydia steadied the stack and tapped the lines. "Sign here and here." Amos signed because a man can give away his name cheaply when he does not understand what else he's surrendering with it. The mistake happened quietly. Lydia had 2 packets on the desk at once, one for emergency ward placement and another left over from the previous circuit visit, delayed adoption forms for county children whose intended sponsors had backed out. The pages shifted. The wrong set rose to the top. The county seal came down. By the time anyone noticed, Poppy Finch had been entered into the record as the legally adopted daughter of Amos Grady. No one knew it then. That evening Amos drove home with a child in his wagon, a sack of flour, a tin of oil, and a silence so strange it seemed to have shape. The road out of Larkspur Crossing ran over open range washed gold by late sun. Dry grass hissed along the wheels. Thunderheads stacked blue over the hills, though the ground-level air stayed hot and brittle. After 2 miles, Poppy said, "Do you really hate children?" The honesty of it almost made him laugh. "I don't know many grown folks I'd recommend," he said. "Children just grow into them." "That's not an answer. It's the one I've got." She rubbed the seam of her sleeve. "People at the home said your wife died because the Lord was punishing you for a mean disposition." He looked at her sharply enough to make the mare toss the reins. Poppy went pale, but held his gaze. Amos faced forward again. "My wife died of lung fever." He did not say the rest. That the same winter his son Daniel had been kicked in the chest by a frightened gelding while Amos was mending tack 10 feet away and not watching closely enough. That grief had buried his wife more surely than fever had. That ever since, every child near a gate, rope, stove, or hoof looked to him like disaster already taking shape. When they topped the rise at sundown, Poppy saw the Grady place below, a long, weathered ranch house, a red barn gone dull at the roofline, a windmill creaking by the stock tank, and cottonwoods along the creek standing green against the dry land. "It's big," she said, "only when something goes wrong in it." He put her in the spare room off the kitchen, the one he had never had the heart to dismantle after Miriam died. At supper, she ate like someone ready to defend every bite. He watched her slip half a biscuit into her pocket and said, "There'll be breakfast." "Maybe," she answered. It was not insolence, merely history. After the meal, he found her kneeling by Moses, his old blue hound, who had not let a stranger touch him in years. The dog had his blunt gray head in her lap, while she worked a burr from behind his ear. "He growls at most folks," Amos said. Poppy shrugged. "I wasn't acting like most folks. Animals can feel when you're demanding to be liked." There was skill in that. Quiet, useful skill. The next morning Amos rode into town before sunup to straighten the matter out. He found Lydia waiting on the courthouse steps with her face gone chalk white. "Mr. Grady," she said, "I made an error." "I'd gathered that much." She held out the file. "I did not enter a temporary guardianship. I entered a full adoption decree." Amos stared at her. "You what?" "The wrong papers were on the desk. It is valid unless reversed by the judge." He took off his hat and raked a hand through his hair. "Can it be undone?" "Yes, but not before the judge returns." She hesitated. "And there is more." From the pocket of her skirt, she drew a folded scrap. Poppy's handwriting, narrow and careful, pressed hard into the page. "If Mr. Reddick asks for me, don't let him take my mama's Bible. The deed is in the back lining." "He knows." Amos read it twice. "Who is Reddick?" he asked, though he already knew. "Silas Reddick," Lydia said. "County Commissioner. Holder of your North Pasture note. He's been trying to absorb Willow Spring Quarter for months. Poppy's father owned it. If the child disappears into county custody and the deed goes missing, Reddick gets management rights." The floor seemed to tilt a little under Amos's boots. The easy path still stood open. Reverse the adoption. Turn the girl over to another family beyond Reddick's reach. Tell himself he had done more than most men would. But the image would not leave him. That child in his wagon with the knife, defending the last inch of herself. When he stepped back onto Main Street, Reddick was waiting under the barber shop awning in gloves and good wool, his smile neat and bloodless. "Unexpected change in your household," he said. Amos stopped 3 feet short of him. "Heard a lot of things, have you? County matters travel. Return the girl, and I'll encourage the judge to reverse the filing quietly. Keep her, and people may wonder why a man who has spent 15 years avoiding children changed his mind overnight. Maybe I got lonesome." Reddick smiled wider. "No. Men like you don't get lonely. They get haunted." He tugged on his gloves finger by finger. "Your note on the North Pasture comes due next month. Poor time to pick a quarrel with the man holding it." Amos said, "If this is a quarrel, you brought it." "Bring the child and the Bible to the county home by sunset," Reddick said. "We'll tidy the paperwork and spare the town unpleasant talk." He walked away without hurry. When Amos got home, Poppy was in the corral talking to the buckskin filly he had failed to halter for 3 weeks. The horse's hide trembled, but she stood. Poppy kept her palms low, voice lower. "You don't crowd something scared," she murmured. "You let it learn the shape of you." A minute later the filly nosed her sleeve. Amos stopped at the fence. "Where'd you learn that?" "My father traded bookkeeping for pasture once. A woman there showed me colts." "What woman?" Poppy frowned. "I never knew her name. She had yellow curtains and laughed like she meant it." "Miriam," Amos thought, and had to grip the rail. Poppy turned then. "Am I going back?" The question landed between them like a bucket dropped down a dry well. What would you have done in his place? If keeping her meant blowing apart the narrow, careful life you had built around your pain, would you have opened the door wider? Or would you have told yourself one rescued child was beyond your strength and let the world take her back? Amos stepped into the corral. The filly danced once, then settled. "No," he said. "Not today." Hope came over Poppy's face so fast it hurt to see. He added, "Because honesty mattered more than comfort. But if you stay here, men are coming." She looked toward the South Hills as if she had expected nothing else. "They come anywhere." At dusk Lydia rode out with a satchel of papers and a face full of weather. The judge was delayed. Reddick had called a county review for the following day. He meant to claim Amos was unfit and the adoption invalid. Poppy came onto the porch carrying a tin cup. "Did he burn the Bible yet?" "Not if he thinks you know where the deed is," Lydia said. Poppy looked at Amos. "I do know." He went still. "You had it all along?" Not on me. Hidden. If I told before, they'd make me show. She lifted her chin. I'll tell you if you swear not to send me back while he's still breathing free air. I swear it, Amos said. Poppy nodded once. In the hymn book Pastor Webb brought, Mama stitched the deed inside the back cover cloth after Pa got sick. The choice became simple in the way only terrible choices do. There would be no quiet retreat from this. He could step fully into it or spend the next 10 years despising himself in new ways. He said, saddle up. And from the dark beyond the pasture came the crack of a rifle and the shattering of the porch lamp. The second shot came through the kitchen window. Glass burst over the table. Poppy dropped flat. Lydia ducked behind the stove. Amos had the rifle off its pegs before the shards finished skittering across the floor. Cellar, he said. Poppy did not waste breath asking questions. She snatched the hymn book from the shelf, shoved it under her dress, and vanished through the pantry door with Lydia on her heels. Outside, horses moved in the yard. More than one. Men who knew a ranch well enough to spread out and darken every side of it. Amos lifted the curtain edge and saw Reddick by the pump, sitting his horse in the dark as if he had come to collect a debt. Send the girl out with the book, he called, and I'll leave your stock standing. Amos answered with a shot that tore Reddick's hat brim and sent the horse leaping sideways. Then the night broke open. Gunfire. A mare screaming. Moses barking himself hoarse. Smoke drifting in, bitter and oily. They had fired the hayrack. Amos ran for the barn because some habits are older than fear and some loves never stop being practical. The heat hit him before he reached the door. Flames were already crawling up the stacked fodder. A hired man rushed him from the side. Amos met him with the rifle, and felt teeth give way. Another grabbed for his sleeve. Moses launched from the dark and buried himself in the man's forearm. Inside, horses were kicking their stalls apart. Amos cut the nearest two loose and slapped them into the yard. Then he reached the buckskin filly just as a lantern smashed against the far wall and flame ran through the straw. Easy, came Poppy's voice from the stall lane. She had somehow gotten out of the cellar and into the barn, soot on one cheek, hymn book still hidden under her dress. She put both hands on the filly's neck and spoke in that low, steady murmur. The horse trembled and held. Amos had one instant to marvel and one to be terrified. Out, he barked. Poppy passed him the lead rope. He shoved her toward the side door, got the filly through after her, and nearly cleared the threshold before something smashed into the back of his skull. Light burst behind his eyes. He dropped to one knee. Reddick's foreman seized Poppy by the arm. She twisted and bit him so hard he yelled. Take her, Reddick shouted. Amos surged up, caught the foreman at the waist, and drove him into the water trough. The man went under thrashing. Amos turned just in time to see Reddick at the gate with Poppy hauled across the saddle in front of him. Her small hand reached toward the porch once. Not begging. Warning. Then they were gone into the dark. Lydia came up from the cellar carrying Amos's revolver and fury in equal measure. Where is she? He was already dragging a saddle onto the bay. With him. You won't catch 3 fresh horses on one tired ranch gelding. He looked at her. She saw then, in his face, the part of him that had not died with Miriam or Daniel, only gone silent from disuse. Then I'd best not waste time arguing, he said. Panic wanted him wild. Grief wanted him blind. But somewhere under both was the hard discipline of a cattleman who knew useless speed killed more surely than delay. He stopped long enough to listen. No wagon. Only horses. South, not town. Reddick would not take Poppy to the sheriff. He would take her somewhere private enough to force the deed from her and public enough to lie afterward. The county home sat between. Lydia caught his sleeve. I'll fetch Hale and Bellamy and every decent soul still awake. Where do you go? To the home first. If I'm wrong, meet me there anyway. He rode hard through smoke and dark. Once, in the wash crossing, he thought of Daniel again, 6 years old, running the barn aisle with a wooden whistle in his hand while Amos yelled for him to slow down. The memory came not like a knife, but like a command. Do not be late twice in one life. At the county home, one lamp burned in the matron's office. Amos slipped in through the coal porch and heard Reddick before he saw him. You tell me where the deed is, Reddick said, and I send you east with shoes and a trunk. You keep on with this nonsense, and you'll wish the Grady ranch had burned faster. Poppy answered from behind the office door. You talk too much for a rich man. Amos might have laughed if his throat had not been closing. He eased the door open. Poppy sat tied to a straight-back chair. Mrs. Renley stood by the stove with a poker in hand. Reddick had his coat off and his sleeves rolled, as if intimidation were a job he intended to do properly. Amos stepped inside and leveled the revolver. "Evening," Mrs. Renley screamed. Reddick turned. Surprise flashed once, then calculation replaced it. "You won't shoot in front of the child," he said. "You mistake me for a man seeking your approval." Reddick lunged for the desk drawer. Amos fired. The bullet shattered the drawer front and buried itself in the wall. Splinters tore Reddick's hand. He reeled back, cursing. Mrs. Renley rushed Poppy with the poker, perhaps thinking a child made the best shield. Amos caught the poker mid-swing, wrenched it free, and shoved the woman aside hard enough to send her into the bookshelves. Poppy's eyes never left his face. "You took your time," she said, her voice shaking only at the edges. "Won't happen again." He cut the rope at her wrists. "Can you run?" "Yes." Reddick had the desk lamp now. He hurled it. Kerosene burst against the curtains. Flame climbed fast. Amos grabbed Poppy and drove her through the side door as smoke rolled low across the ceiling. They hit the yard running. For one savage heartbeat, Amos thought the pounding hooves on the road meant more of Reddick's men. Then Sheriff Hale's voice split the dark. "Drop it!" Lantern lights spread across the yard as Hale, Lydia, Bellamy, Pastor Webb, and 3 ranch hands came in fast. Reddick burst through the office door with his sleeves smoking and stopped under half the town's guns. Still, he tried for it. Men like that always do. He broke into county property and abducted a ward under review. Reddick shouted. Poppy stepped out from behind Amos before anyone else could speak. Her wrists were rope-marked. Her cheek was ash-streaked. She held the hymn book against her chest like a Bible and a weapon both. "He came because you stole me," she said. No one in that yard doubted which voice held the truth. Hale took Reddick in irons, but the man kept smiling through blood and soot. "Tomorrow's review still stands," he said. "You may save the child from tonight. You won't save the ranch from law." That was the cliff edge, because he was right about one thing. Dawn would not finish this. Morning would only drag it into the open. Before sunrise, Amos took Poppy to the line shack on the North Meadow, a one-room cabin by the creek where he slept during calving season. He would not have her bed one room away from the man who had laid hands on her. Lydia came too, carrying bread, bandages, and the sort of competence heaven sometimes sends disguised as a widow with ink on her fingers. The shack smelled of pine boards, cold creek water, and old coffee. Dawn seeped pale through the small window. Amos sat on the bunk while Lydia cleaned the cut at his hairline. Poppy sat by the stove wrapped in one of his coats, the hymn book in her lap, staring into the fire as if it held something she needed translated. When Lydia finished, she touched Poppy's shoulder. "I have to ride into town and prepare for the hearing. Can you keep each other till noon?" Poppy nodded. Amos said go. After Lydia left, the shack fell quiet except for the creek and the stove ticking as it heated. Amos poured coffee, caught the look on Poppy's face, and set it aside. Instead, he warmed milk and stirred in molasses the way Miriam had once done for Daniel after storms. Poppy held the cup with both hands. "You came back. I said I would. Lots of folks say things." The firelight made her look younger. Not because it softened her, but because it revealed the child fear had been dressing in older manners. Amos rested his forearms on his knees. "I know." She watched the steam rise. "When they took me, I thought maybe you'd stop because of the horses. Or the house. Or because I wasn't really yours yet." The shame of that hit him square. "Listen to me," he said. "A house isn't worth a child. A barn isn't worth a child. And blood isn't the only thing that makes somebody yours." Poppy's eyes filled then, not spilling over, only shining. "A house ain't family because it keeps weather out," she whispered. "It's family when somebody inside notices you're gone." He had no fine answer to that. Only truth. "I noticed." She nodded, as if setting down something she had been carrying too long. The words came easier after that. She told him about the county home at night, how the little ones whimpered in sleep and were shaken quiet, how her father had taught her sums by writing them in spilled flour because paper cost money, how her mother had sung while darning socks and stitched the deed into the hymn book after Reddick started visiting too often. Amos told her about Miriam's yellow curtains, Daniel's wooden whistle, and the year he stopped listening for laughter because hearing it hurt too much. Poppy turned the cup in her hands. "Was your boy scared of horses?" "No." "Then maybe that's why he was taken fast. Brave things are often fast things." He let out a breath that had once been trying to become a sob and had now learned another shape. She reached into the coat pocket and brought out a chipped red glass button. This was on my mama's Sunday dress. When I get scared, I rub it. Makes me think some things stay themselves even when the dress is gone. She held it out. Take it till the hearing. You've got to look like you might break something if you need your hands empty. He stared at the button, then took it carefully. In return, he opened the drawer under the bunk and drew out Daniel's wooden whistle, worn smooth by years of grief. Then you hold this for me, he said. Poppy accepted it with both hands. If this story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep telling the kind of stories where good people are finally seen before the world can turn them into something smaller. By noon, the church in Larkspur Crossing was full. The judge chose it over the courthouse because the courthouse would not hold both bodies in outrage. Dust clung to boots. Sun flashed on wagon rims outside. Inside, every bench creaked under the weight of people who had finally decided they were tired of swallowing what they knew. Judge Mercer had ridden in hard and looked like a man who preferred truth to manners. Reddick stood near the pulpit with his hand bandaged and a lawyer from Casper at his side. Mrs. Renley sat rigid in the front pew, face bloodless and mean. Sheriff Hale kept one hand on his belt and the other on the piece of the room. Lydia laid out the copied records. Bellamy brought the county ledger showing the Willow Spring petition. Pastor Webb produced the hymn book. When the back cover cloth was slit before the room, the folded deed slid free. A murmur moved through the church. Reddick did not flinch. A deed proves ownership, not abuse, he said. Mr. Grady is a bereaved eccentric who seized a child in the street. The rest is sentiment. Then Poppy stood. She wore one of Lydia's mended dresses and Daniel's whistle on a string under the collar where only Amos knew it lay. She was small in front of that room, but not one soul there mistook size for weakness anymore. He says sentiment like it's dirty, she said, looking straight at Reddick. But what he means is people noticing one another before he gets the chance to sell them off. She lifted her bruised wrists for the room to see. He wanted the land because it had water. He wanted me because I had the paper. And he wanted everybody quiet because quiet is how men like him stay rich. No one moved. Not even Reddick. Amos rose after her. For 15 years he had made a life out of standing one step back from every gathering, every supper, every hymn sing, every school Christmas, because it was easier to be called difficult than to risk being called broken. Now he came forward and stood beside the girl with the whole town watching. I did not mean to adopt her, he said. That part is true. A rustle went through the benches. He let it. But I mean it now? And if any man in this room thinks intention matters more than what a person chooses after fear has had its say, then he's lived too soft to instruct me on anything worth hearing. Lydia closed her eyes once, smiling despite herself. Judge Mercer asked what mattered. Had the child been mistreated? Yes. Had county process been corrupted? Yes. Was the deed lawfully hers? Yes. Had Commissioner Reddick abused his office in pursuit of the parcel? By then, even the lawyer from Casper had stopped pretending otherwise. Reddick made one final move for freedom. He lunged toward Poppy, perhaps to seize her, perhaps only to turn the room chaotic enough to escape through it. He never reached her. Amos stepped in front of the bench like a gate slamming shut. Not with a gun, not with rage, with his whole body, planted and certain. Reddick hit him, bounced off, and Hale took him to the floor with help from two ranch hands who had once owed him money and now seemed glad of the repayment. When Reddick was hauled up again, coat torn and dignity worse, Mrs. Delacour called from the back. About time somebody noticed that man ain't taller than the law after all, and the church broke into the kind of laughter that ends one world before the next begins. Judge Mercer voided the county claim on Willow Spring, suspended Mrs. Renley at once, ordered an inquiry into every placement and ledger under Reddick's authority, and held the commissioner for assault, fraud, and unlawful coercion. By dusk his accounts were frozen, his papers seized, and 3 men who had been brave only in service to power were suddenly eager to testify. Destroyed. Not wounded. Not inconvenienced. Destroyed. 2 days later Amos stood once more in the courthouse office with Lydia Marr, this time under clean light and with the correct forms laid out in careful order. The prior filing can still be reversed, Lydia said softly. If you want the record to show it was all error. Poppy sat by the window, hands folded so tightly in her lap they looked sewn there. Amos read the new paper from top to bottom. Then he set it aside and signed the old decree again, this time in the margin where confirmation of intent was required. The first part was a mistake, he said. This part isn't. Poppy made a small sound he felt more than heard. He crossed the room and crouched so they were eye to eye. You don't have to earn staying, he told her. You've done enough of that for one life. She threw her arms around his neck then, quick and fierce, and held on. He gathered her close with one hand over the back of her head, smelling dust, soap, creek water, and sun-warmed wool, and understood with a kind of stunned reverence that love had not left his house when Miriam and Daniel died. It had only gone quiet and waited for him to become brave enough to hear it again. Summer moved on after that, but the Grady place no longer felt like a man serving time inside it. Poppy planted beans in crooked rows and argued with the hens as if they were hired help. Amos mended the porch swing Miriam had once wanted thrown out. Lydia rode out often under one excuse or another, and before August was done there was a blue ribbon in the kitchen drawer she kept forgetting to take home. The Valley children, hearing Amos Grady now kept an orphan girl and had not turned to stone, began stopping by the gate with orphan calves, scraped knees, and questions about fishing worms. He tolerated this badly at first, and then with suspicious improvement. By the first cool evening of September, Willow Spring was restored in Poppy's name and leased back to Amos until she came of age, the money set aside in a bank account Hale oversaw personally. Mrs. Renley left the county in disgrace. Reddick went to Cheyenne in irons to answer charges that would strip him cleaner than winter strips of cottonwood. Justice, when it finally arrived, did not come like thunder. It came like a gate unlatched and a whole valley stepping through. Months later, when frost silvered the pasture and geese wrote their black, crooked letters across the sky, Amos came in from the barn to find Poppy at the kitchen table with her slate, Daniel's whistle beside one elbow, Moses at her feet, and Lydia laughing over some arithmetic disaster dramatic enough to deserve witness. Biscuits were rising. The lamp painted the room gold. And Amos, standing in the doorway with the evening cold still on his coat, thought how strange it was that all those years he had believed love left a house by dying, when sometimes it only steps outside and waits stubborn as weather for somebody brave enough to invite it back in. Next time, we'll tell the story of the scarred blacksmith who bought a wedding dress at auction for reasons no one understood, and the widowed seamstress who knew at once it was never meant for a bride.